of IIIU, Dr. Shafiq Hashim, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Professor Dr. Philip Termonte, all lecturers, staff, and students of IIIU, distinguished attendees, ladies and gentlemen. We are delighted to welcome you to the Theater Hall building of Universitas Islam International Indonesia in the occasion of public lecture by Faculty of Social Sciences with the topic Linking Qualitative and Quantitative Methods in Social Sciences. I am Salsabila, and on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to extend our highest appreciation for your attendance and participation. Ladies and gentlemen, to start this event, please join me in welcoming the Vice Rector for Research, Cooperation, and Community Engagement of IIIU, to Dr. Shafiq Hashim. The time is yours.
Good morning, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Honorable guest lecturers, speakers, Pak Tom, Pepinsky, Honorable Deans, Professor Philip Termonte, we are very fortunate and blessed to have him here. He is the only priest we have here. Catholic by name, but Islam by religion. Honorable lecturers, participant of the, what do you call? This is part of the summer course, right? Okay. I know Pak Tim for not really long time ago. Pak Toms, yeah, sorry. I think we met long time ago in Jakarta, in the launching of your book and Pak Saiful Mujani, right? 2 years before COVID, I think, yeah. But we didn't have a long conversation with him. Pak Tom is prominent political scientist working on cooperative politics with focus area of Indonesia in Southeast Asia. He is leading Indonesianists from North America, as well as the next generation of Indonesianists, preceded by giant scholars such Clifford Church, Dwight King, Robert Hefner, and many others. And I believe Pak Tom has some kind of very specific approach. As I follow you Twitters and now X too, I read a lot your posts, but sometimes I didn't understand because we have different kind of academic backgrounds. You are very political science and very Americans. I'm Islamic studies and very European. UII is very honored to have you, Pak Tom, here, as I hear from the faculty members in the political science department. Of course, as I mentioned before, Pak Tom had a lot of work, very important books, journal article, opinions, ideas in the social media, and etc. And I think your contribution in this kind of work, journal article, and etc., enrich our understanding on especially social science and political science, especially in the context of our university here. As you know that we are just starting our programs, I think 3 years ago, starting with the MA program first. We have 4 faculties. Faculty of Social Science, I mentioned first because you are here. Then the second is Faculty of Islamic Studies, the Faculty of Education, and also the Faculty of Economics. Economic meaning here is not only conventional economics, but also what we call now Sharia economic. Because honestly speaking, our university is under the Ministry of Religious Affairs. Even we are given legal status as independent state, independence university, but still is the Department of Religious Affairs or other ministry are there, we should also lot having consultation with them in order not to deviate from their ideas. This is very difficult for us actually. We want to have university that have some kind of liberation spirit, yeah, freedoms in disseminating the issues, and then have flexibility to hire international lecturers, international professor like you, Pak Tom, and many. But so far, we can deal with this kind of issue, especially with this university, because the university is part of the national priority project of Jokowi regime. Even Mora, the Ministry of Religious Affairs, is our boss, but because we have very high status at the university, now we still have freedom. Yeah, we still have freedom, we still have liberations to organize and to arrange our really wants to implement this kind of names into our academic reputations, into academic organization here, yeah, into mode of thought and thinking here, yeah, and I their productivity, and especially because of their approach. Yeah, they really bring some kind of new approach to us. Most of us are having academic background with the State Islamic University, with the classical books, with the middle age analysis and methodologies. And Faculty of Social Science come to us, especially the lecturers, especially the deans. You know, Pak Tom, I approached him for a long time. Since our building was still in the scratch, yeah, the building is only this and not yet well established too. A lot of dust and everything, but he was still hesitant whether he want to accept or not. I told him, if you want to become priest, if you want to dedicate yourself for the interest not only for reset, and etc., but also for religion and ummah, you should come here. Yeah, and I think the summer course is some kind of the thing that we always share and sell to the guests, international guests, to the prospective funders, to the governments and etc. Yeah, we have this kind of activity, and this is really internationally designed activity. And now we are already in the third summer course, and we are really happy that in the third summer course, the program is opened by Pak Tom. I think you will give us a lot of spirit, yeah, stimulations, and motivations. This is very important, especially for the young lecturers. Yeah, for the young lecturers, how is the importance of being lecturer? How is the important for being productive? Yeah, but productive meaning that we didn't follow the way of the governments measure our productivity. Yeah, but productive in the substantive meanings. You should have good writings, good articles, solid articles in terms of methodology and also the findings. And all of this that can be proud of us as the International Islamic University. This is the only international Islamic university we have, and a lot of responsibility, obligations that we should fulfill. And we hope that everything will be smoothly running, especially as the university bureaucrat. Now we are under Dakdikduk, facing the new governments. How we should deal with the new government actually. Yeah, a lot of effort we already do, and we just passed the first examination just 15 days ago. Yeah, we have new, not really new, but we have new rectors, actually not really new rector. He was our rector also before, but he nominated again as the rector, and all people here, especially lecturers and students, were worried whether we have really new rector coming from somewhere to be installed here. But fortunately, we still have the rector that we hope that this rector can bring us into the, let's say, go beyond from the formative years of the university. Finally, I would like to congratulate to all of you and have nice discussion, and very thank to you, Pak Tom, to come here. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Shafiq, for the wonderful speech. The next welcoming remarks will be delivered by the Dean of Faculty Social Sciences, to Dr. Philip J. Vermonting. Time is yours.
Very good morning to you all. And first of all, I'd like, of course, to thank Pak Tom Pepinsky for agreeing doing this. This is our third summer training program. And also thanks to Pak Shafiq, Professor Shafiq, our Vice Rector. If you want to blame someone for snatching me from CSIS, he's the one. He makes me leaving my super comfort zone as the Executive Director of CSIS And then he persuaded me to come here, see the building. When he called me, he said, let's come and see the university. I said, what university? There's new university in Depok, he said. So I come here, rainy days, becek, muddy, and so on, you know, half done building. But then he was with his magic doa-doa. He's a NU Kiai, right? I don't know what he was doing to me, but somehow I got hypnotized and I agreed to come. But that's probably a good decision on my part because, as he said, this is a new initiative, university, and then of course, in our Faculty of Social Sciences, we try as well to bring new perspective. And one of the perspective has been that we want to provide robust social science program. That includes robust training in methodology, something that we feel missing from the overall training of social sciences in Indonesia. And I think, we think at the Faculty of Social Sciences, we can contribute a little on that particular part of the social science training in Indonesia. And as Pak Safik said, this is the third time we had. The first time, only a handful of students signed up. And then I don't know why. At that time, 3 years ago, it was free. We do not ask for fees. And yet, only small numbers of students came and attended the training. So the second year, we changed our strategy. We require people to pay, and they pay, and they come. So there's no such thing as free lunch, except for probably the new government, there will be free lunch. Right? Which is good, because that's APBN funded. But what we are trying to say is that we want to make this training, participants can feel the ownership. It is designed by faculty members of Faculty of Social Sciences to be some kind of a Lebaran day, right? For method enthusiasts across Indonesia, researchers, students, lecturers, or public in general who are interested in method. So we designed this as that kind of gathering for one full summer, i.e. 3 months, with various modules, combining qualitative and quantitative modules training. Because we understand, as Pak Safik said, there are a lot of traditions, backgrounds of our faculty members. Some had training in the US, some had training in Europe, some had training in Australia, and in Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world with different kind of training. So we want to have a platform for these various backgrounds to give a chance for our students, for our lecturers as well, to be exposed to methods being used in the study of social science. Because this is a graduate university, we only have master's and PhD program. That's why, you know, method is a big part of this thesis writing and PhD training as well. Secondly, this is also a collaborative effort. This is the third year we have collaboration with the Indonesian Pollsters Association, which is Ordal, nepotism. I happen to be the chairman of that association. But this year as well, we have a collaboration with faculty members of Faculty of Economic and Business at the University of Indonesia. And it's just so happened a few months ago, I got the invitation to be the examiner of a PhD dissertation at the Faculty of Economics at UI. The candidates was writing about economic voting behavior. And then, so in that PhD examination, the idea came with the Dean of the Faculty of Economics there, and then he agreed, and thanks if there are any representative from the Faculty of Economics of the University of Indonesia around the participants today, thank you. And also I'd like to thank Dr. Testriono, this year's convener of the summer training on qualitative and quantitative method. Thank you, Pak Testri, for your hard efforts in preparing, approaching speakers, and then of course his help by the, what is this? We joke, the father of qualitative and quantitative method of Faculty of Social Sciences, Dr. Siro. Oh, Pak Siro, pada Pak Siro, right? Okay. Pak Zero, thank you. He's the convener of the first two because it's his vision to have this kind of training going on, and this is the third year continued by Pak Tesri. And of course, other faculty members of Faculty of Social Sciences have been very helpful as well. And our super staff, right, Syahrul, Maulida, Rida, I think they also have been very instrumental. It's not easy to organize, and approaching dozens of trainers from overseas, from Indonesia, from outside Depok, to agree, and then preparing all the logistical needs of this training. So without our magnificent team, Syahrul, Rida, and Mao, and Sarah, this would not have been possible. And of course, I thank you for coming, and I hope you will enjoy. And if you have things in mind for collaboration and cooperation with us, approach us, and then we will sit and discuss with you, so this can be expanded into more broader audience possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Philip, for the insightful speech. Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time for our main agenda that has been awaited. Our distinguished speaker today, Professor Thomas Pepinsky, is the Walter LaFeber Professor in the Department of Government at Brookings School of Public Policy at Cornell University, a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, Washington, D.C., United States of America. Now I will give the floor to the Honorable Dr. Gede Metra, the lecturer in Faculty of Social Sciences, who will guide the discussion.
Thank you everyone for coming. Good morning. I don't think Pak Tom needs much of an introduction. Most of us here, I see familiar faces and friends, have read Pak Tom's work on Indonesia's and Malaysia's politics, Islam, voting behaviors, but also at disciplinary level, Pak Tom has also contributed to the literature on methods, and that's the reason why we have Pak Tom as our main speaker this morning. Without further ado, please join me in welcome Pak Tom.
So, should I stand up here? Yes, definitely. And I will use this against the thing. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I want to extend a special thank you, Chutney. In Jakarta since before the pandemic. And the picture that you saw up there before was me before the pandemic. And now this is me after the pandemic. So time marches on, we get a little bit older, maybe I need the picture. But it's an honor to be here and to speak with you all about linking qualitative and quantitative methods in the social sciences. So before I begin, I want to mention that this is not an easy presentation to give, because there tend to be fairly strong divides in the social sciences between quantitative scholars and qualitative scholars. So, if I were to give you a presentation about qualitative methods only, half of you would say, okay, that's very interesting, and the other half of you would fall asleep. Or if I give you a presentation about quantitative methods, the other half of you would be very interested, but the first half of you would fall asleep or say, I don't care. But so long as we're not trying to mix them, no problem. Qualitative here, quantitative here, easy peasy. When you force them to be linked together, when you decide to link qualitative and quantitative methods, the risk that you run is that you make everybody angry. Everybody is annoyed because everybody thinks that you're giving each side. This one. Everybody thinks that you're giving each position a bad reputation or speaking about it falsely.
So that's the struggle that I have. My goal today is to give you a presentation about linking qualitative and quantitative methods, which is respectful both to the qualitative methods and respectful to the quantitative methods, that allows us to be honest and forthright about the weaknesses of both in the service of trying to argue that by combining them we will make them better. And so that's what I'll try to do today. Minta maaf kalau if this doesn't go well, you'll tell me later. But my goal here, again, as I said, is to try to find a way to bring these things together. And the point is that it's hard. And so, Tester, you gave me the worst assignment possible. But we're going to do the best we can. So, let's get started. So, what does it mean to link qualitative and quantitative methods? Actually, the basic structure of today's presentation is I'm going to give you 3 answers to the question, what does it mean to link qualitative and quantitative methods? Before we do that, though, I want to start by clarifying what I mean by qualitative methods and what I mean by quantitative methods, just so nobody's too angry on either side that I've done it incorrectly. So I don't mean qualitative data and quantitative data, okay? That's also important. Those are very important things to keep in mind as well. When I say qualitative methods, I mean something other than qualitative data. When I say qualitative methods, I mean approaches to learning about social sciences that are structured in a narrative, historical, or interpretive way. I'm thinking about ways of doing social science research that are attendant to, that are paying real close attention to complex interactions in causal forces. I'm talking about causal processes that unfold in nonlinear ways over long timescales. Right? I'm looking at the types of analyses that you can only do by talking about politics as a kind of evolutionary or gradualist thing that you can only talk about using a kind of narrative approach. Qualitative methods is going to be privileging getting specific cases right rather than trying to generalize across all the cases. And I'll use the term causes of effects. What does that mean? I will be interested, qualitative scholars are less interested in saying what is the effect of X on Y than they are in saying what is the cause of Y, right? Instead of saying the effect of X on Y, which is what we'll talk about in a second, the interest is in answering the question, what caused Y? Okay, so that's what I mean by qualitative methods, approaches to studying politics or the social sciences that focus on these things. When I say quantitative methods, I'm going to be talking about kind of a different approach, right? This is a type of research which is focusing on making inferences using numerical techniques, right? Qualitative scholars know what numbers are. It's not to say that qualitative methods is non-numerical. The point is that for a quantitative scholar, it's the use of numerical methods to do the inferences about society or the characteristic features of it, right? We are thinking, in this case, often about much simpler causal relationships rather than complex and interactive ones. We'll be focusing on an explicit model of counterfactual causal inferences, okay? Quantitative methods are they have an affinity towards studying very short-term causal effects, like if I do this, what happens next types of things, or very, very long range, but basically bivariate simple correlations between this happened in 1500 and this happens in the year 2000. The priority is learning general things about all units under consideration rather than specific things about particular units. And instead of doing causes of effects, what is the cause of Y? Our priority here is understanding the effects of causes. What is the effect of X? Okay? So as you can see here, I've cited an important book by Gertz Mahoney called A Tale of Two Cultures, Qualitative and Quantitative Research in the Social Sciences. It's a good book. I suggest that you read it if you're interested in the things that I'm talking about here. And what this book does is it tries to say that qualitative and quantitative methods, one's not better than the other, one doesn't have priority over the other. They're just different. There are two different ways of learning about the social world. And the purpose of them writing this book is to say, you don't have to try to link qualitative and quantitative methods because they're trying to do two different things. It's not obvious that you would want these things to be linked in the first place. So I want to show this to you, and I want to start with this approach here because it's really important for me to not caricature either qualitative or quantitative methods. I want us to be respectful about both of them. And I also want to, this I think highlights the fact that it ought not be easy to link qualitative and quantitative methods because they are trying to do two different things. But I'm going to do it anyway. So now let's ask the question explicitly, should we link qualitative and quantitative methods? And as every question of this form in the social sciences, there are a couple of different answers, right? Let me give you the pros. Why should you link qualitative and quantitative methods? Well, by one perspective, if you can do both, why wouldn't you do both? If it's possible to use both qualitative and quantitative methods at the same time, obviously you should do that, right? So we should link qualitative and quantitative methods because the more that we do, the more confident we are. Another argument that you might have in favor of linking qualitative and quantitative methods is that we should be respectful of everybody. So we should have an inclusive, pluralist understanding of the social sciences in which there is space both for qualitative and for quantitative methods. More specifically, you might also argue that if it's the case that qualitative and quantitative methods give you the same findings, you would be more confident about what you've learned than you would be if you only had evidence from one. So this is an argument, again, that if it's possible to do both types of research and learn from both of them, obviously you would do so, right? These are the pros. This is the reason why it would be good to link qualitative and quantitative methods. But there's also some downsides and there's some real questions about whether or not this is a good idea. Specifically, I want to focus on the first thing I've written up here. This is my new favorite terminology, the idea of commensurate. Commensurate means that they can be understood on each other's own terms at the same time, that they sort of are talking about the same sort of thing or they make sense together. Are qualitative and quantitative methods commensurate? The idea of linking them presupposes that they are commensurate. You would only link them if they are commensurate. But the introduction to qualitative versus quantitative methods that I gave you like 3 minutes ago suggested that they're actually doing two different things. And so linking them may not be a very good idea because they have different objectives. So making them talk to each other, at the very least, it might be a waste of time because they're not supposed to be talking to each other. Also, what do you do if your qualitative analysis and your quantitative analysis don't give you the same findings? Does that mean you have to choose, is the qualitative better than the quantitative? Does that mean you have to decide one of them is more appropriate than the other one is? I don't want to answer that question because answering that question is going to suggest that one is better than the other. But the idea of linking qualitative methods and quantitative methods does suggest that they ought to be linkable. And if they're not, we have a question of whether or not one of them has to be discarded in favor of the other one. A third reason, and this is a very pragmatic reason, but let's talk about it. How hard is it to do quantitative methods? It's pretty hard. How hard is it to do qualitative methods? It's pretty hard. What if you have to do both? Now, I don't want to ask you all to have to do more research. You have to be an expert in both of them. That seems a little bit inappropriate. When we try to do multi-method research, we're basically compelling one another to be experts in multiple things that just for the purposes of perhaps making us feel better and more inclusive. Maybe it's a good idea for there to be qualitative scholars who do qualitative things and quantitative scholars who do quantitative things, and we keep them separate. Everybody can have their own space. It's possible. If you do try to link qualitative and quantitative methods and you find that it's too onerous to do both of them, it's too hard to learn both of them, what if that produces, this is the fourth possibility up here, research that's actually just not very good at either, right? Imagine, the goal of linking qualitative methods is not to do both bad qualitative methods and bad quantitative methods, right? But if it's the case that people have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of capacity to learn, which all of us do, none of us can do everything, none of us is an expert in everything, then asking us to put them together is a mistake as well. And then finally, I've written up here the division of labor. So by this, what I mean is, like, perhaps it would just be a lot easier for everybody if we allowed qualitative scholars to specialize in what they do and quantitative scholars to specialize in what they do. And that, like, this is, again, the sort of pluralism or inclusion thing, but rather, like, specifically about you, like, if it's too onerous to learn both of them, maybe it would be better, instead of doing qualitative research and then trying to also learn qualitative research, we try to encourage you to learn even more qualitative research. So focus more on what you know rather than trying to expand to things you don't know. So those are the pros and cons. I don't know what you're supposed to do. I'm going to give you 3 answers to the question, though, about how to link qualitative and quantitative methods that presuppose that it is possible and a good idea to do it. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 arguments in favor, and the majority of what I'm going to talk about is those things. And then I'm going to give you some criticisms, and then I'm going to stop. So, what does it mean to link? The way I'm going to structure this is to talk about 3 different meanings of the word linking. So this is Testriono's words. Linking. What does it mean to link? Apetu linking. Linking might mean using. So one answer to the question is just like using qualitative and quantitative methods at the same time. That's pretty easy. You know, it's not that substantial, not that hard. We can all make sense of this. Maybe it means combining, though. Maybe it means trying to find a common logic for qualitative and quantitative methods to work together. Maybe it means research projects have to have both. Maybe it means we learn more by using both at the same time. Okay, that's going to be harder. The hardest, though, is going to be aligning. This is going to mean, for the purposes of today's presentation, making qualitative methods usable in a quantitative framework. Right? I do not know of any way to do it the other way. I can't go backwards. I don't know how to do making quantitative methods make sense to a qualitative framework. I'm going to mean making quantitative methods aligned with the logic of quantitative inference. And I'm not sure anybody wants to do that, and I'm not sure I do either, but I do want to say, using is easier than combining. Combining is easier than aligning. It'll be progressively harder to follow what I'm talking about without doing the readings that I'm going to show you up here. And in fact, when it comes to aligning, I can't even really describe it myself. I'm going to do my best to point you in the right direction, and you can go from there. But suffice it to say, this is these are going to be 3 arguments about how to link qualitative and quantitative methods that go from easy to hard. And I'm going to do this by giving you examples from real research which is out there, and I promise I'll only talk about myself one time. Okay, let me start by taking the perspective of linking means using. So when I say linking means using, what I have in mind is, if you are a qualitative scholar, how might you use quantitative methods to further your qualitative research? Okay, so we're just going to say qualitative research can use quantitative methods, and, if your methodological approach is qualitative or quantitative, how might you use qualitative evidence as part of your analysis? And the secret here is that I think most of us already do this. More specifically, most good research already does this. You don't have to be taught what I'm about to tell you, I don't think. But it's important to recognize that there is no quantitative research that is ignorant of qualitative information, and there's also no good qualitative research which is ignorant of quantitative information. Let me give you the example. I promise this is the only time I'm going to talk about myself. Okay. This is a selection from a book called Piety and Public Opinion, Kesalahan dan Opini Publik. That was published by Oxford University Press a couple years ago. And my co-authors on this are Bill Little, Emeritus Professor at Ohio State, and Saiful Mujani, Jago Survey di Indonesia. Right? So what we have here is just a couple of pictures of things that we did in this book. This book was extremely hard to get published because it was a quantitative analysis of public opinion in Indonesia about Islam, whose main conclusion was a null finding. right? That it was very hard to get publishers to care about this, but we did it anyway. We spend an enormous amount of time in this book trying to develop quantitative measures of piety in Indonesia. What we wanted to do was figure out if there's a way to take surveys and extract from survey answers a measure of how pious somebody is, right? Now, I'm in, Uiii here, so you guys know that like measuring something like piety among Indonesian Muslims, it ought to be hard. This is not an easy thing to do. It's going to be very complicated. Conceptually, you need to be very precise. There's going to be a lot of variation. We do not imagine that this is an easy thing to do. And so I'm just showing you, for example, we did some analyses using factor analysis, and it made pretty figures. And then we did things where we could like predict if there are differences in piety across ethnic groups in Indonesia, and there are, and they sort of make sense when you look at them, right? These are reasonable findings. I'm telling you this because none of the three of us could have done any of this research if we didn't understand a whole lot about Indonesia. Not from surveys, right? To know what questions to ask, we had to have a qualitative understanding of Indonesian society, right? You cannot know this sitting at your computer in America and running regressions. You cannot know how to ask these questions. If you tried to do this, and in fact, the only reason why our book was published is because a lot of people do sit in front of their computers in America and try to invent measures of how pious people are around the world. And we were able to say that those measures weren't very good because they didn't know anything about any specific place. So the point is, to make any analysis of piety and public opinion in Indonesia, even a book which is basically exclusively quantitative, we had to have an immense amount of qualitative information. Now, Saiful has this information because he's an Indonesian Muslim. Bill has this information because he spent 70 years coming to Indonesia and learning about these questions. I have this information because I sit in America and I read a whole bunch of books and I read a lot of history, and I've spent some time in Indonesia also, so I've learned some things. But none of this do I know because I know numbers, right? This is not mein angka. This is understanding Indonesian history. And no matter what I find, no matter what we find in these regressions, no matter what we find in these analyses, if the qualitative interpretation upon which we ground these findings is wrong, then the findings are wrong, right? If the qualitative evidence is wrong, none of this makes any sense. It's all worthless. So I give you this example because I'm trying to tell you it's extremely important for any quantitative information, any quantitative analysis, even purely the most boring quantitative analysis you can imagine. None of it can make sense without qualitative information. So in one sense, linking quantitative and qualitative methods is not hard. It's not exotic. It's not something that you have to be told to do. You couldn't possibly do this research unless you had done that in the first place. So that's a pretty easy perspective, right? It doesn't require a whole bunch of fancy thinking. You just have to think about what you do when you do quantitative analysis. Let me go the other way. Here is an example of an entirely qualitative book. This is the book, The Pol Pot Regime, Race, Power, and Genocide in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge. If you have not read this book, it's very good. It's also very long. It's also very hard to read. It's difficult. I mean, it's not that you can read it, but it's like difficult on the soul, right? It deals with very difficult questions and very difficult topics. And one of the main questions is, how did the Pol Pot regime orchestrate mass murder? And what did genocide look like in Cambodia? It's just a hard thing to read. One of the things that Kiernan does in this book is he looks at, this is a book of history. It's a book by a historian about history. But one thing that he does to learn about the genocide is he looks at estimates of the survival rate of different communities in Cambodia, right? What percentage of different types of people were still alive after the genocide had been over, after Pol Pot was replaced, after he was driven back into the jungle. And what he does, for example, is he has these tabulations like you see right here, where he says, this is the population that was here in 1975. This is the estimate of how many people perished during the genocide. And the important thing is this number, some of these numbers are bigger than other numbers, right? The percentage of people who died during the, of different groups who perished during the genocide is different for different types of Cambodians, right? Basically, every urban Vietnamese person was murdered. But that's not true of people in the rural areas, right? So you know something more about the genocide if you understand that there was an ethnic dimension to it, right? This is very important stuff. Now, this is a trivial example because you don't need statistics to understand that 25 is different than 100, right? You don't have to be told that. However, you can run a chi-square test if you want to, and it will test the hypothesis that the rates of genocide for urban Chinese, for example, or urban Vietnamese are different for rural Khmer. And you will find that you can strongly reject the null hypothesis here. The point is, here's an entirely qualitative book that uses numbers because numbers are important, and obviously numbers are important. You couldn't make this argument without numbers. And it's perfectly compatible with a historical approach to use quantitative methods to test hypotheses about these findings, right? So here's another example of using quantitative methods to make a qualitative argument, okay? But there's nothing special about this. You probably wouldn't even imagine that this is like linking qualitative methods and quantitative methods because they seem like the same thing. So this is my first conclusion. Sometimes integrating qualitative and quantitative methods is not a big deal. It's not that fancy, it's not that special, it's not that surprising. You don't have to really think about it, but if you think about it enough, you can see really a nice way to make them aligned. So what this means is there are lots of research questions in qualitative methods that are really complicated. They have lots of different parts. Sometimes there may be parts of these questions that depend on a quantitative piece of information. And so you use the quantitative methods to analyze that part of the research, but the rest of it is entirely qualitative. Subliknia, right? On the other hand, sometimes there are entirely quantitative pieces of research, but if we want to relate what the numbers say to what the history says, then you have to know something about history and society and culture and politics and things like this. And so there's really no reason to think that there's a special effort that's required to link qualitative and quantitative methods because good scholarship is self-evidently going to be using quantitative methods when they're appropriate for qualitative questions, and will self-evidently be using qualitative methods to answer quantitative questions when appropriate. It's not a big deal. It doesn't require us to talk about it. And so that's about all I have to say about that. Now it's going to get more complicated. Remember, that was the easy one, right? This isn't hard. This isn't complicated. It's not confusing. Now let's think about linking means combining. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit like those are not like combining qualitative methods and quantitative methods. It's just like you use one to do the other. Now let's think about what social scientists these days often called multi-method research designs. Who here has a PhD from a US university in political science? Some of us do. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Do you know? Were you ever told that it's important to be a multi-method scholar? That multi-method scholarship is the most important type, that's the best type of scholarship? Yes, this is, those of you who have experience in the US hearing about these debates know that this is the accepted answer. This is what you're supposed to say. Multi-method scholarship is good. You would never say, I'm just a quantitative, I'm just a qualitative. You're supposed to do multi-method. So, what does multi-method research really mean? Well, actually, in point of fact, it probably means doing one of two things. One of them is, as I've written up here, so you establish a quantitative relationship, some sort of like quantitative correlation or causal effect or some sort of analysis of an effect of X on Y or a correlation between X on Y. And then you do intensive qualitative research to demonstrate why that correlation exists. Okay? So in that sense, you're using qualitative methods in service of supporting a quantitative finding. On the other hand, it also might be you do intensive qualitative research first about a single case. And then you say, well, is this just an exception? Is this just a single case that doesn't represent anything? Or is this or can I generalize the findings from my one case to the rest of the world. So for example, you would say, okay, I've understood the relationship between Islam and politics in Indonesia. Now let me test if that's the same as the relationship between Islam and politics in every country in the world. You take a specific finding from a specific spot, and then you generalize beyond that to the rest of the world. So there's two different ways. There's two different general approaches that are used, and I'm going to just introduce them to you. First, we'll talk about the start qualitative, then go quantitative. This is one of the best articles that has ever been published in comparative politics methodology. It's called How the Cases You Choose Affect the Answers You Get, Selection Bias in Comparative Politics. It was published in 1991 by Barbara Geddes in the journal Political Analysis. And I'm not sure you can see everything here. Maybe you can see all the words up here. Here's the point she was trying to make. She said that there was a lot of research, she observed that in the 1980s there was a lot of research on the relationship between labor repression and economic growth. A lot of that research focused on Southeast Asia, some of it focused on Indonesia. And a lot of people concluded from studying single countries, or maybe 2 or 3 countries in these regions, that countries that repress labor grow faster. And the implication is, well, if you're a developing country and you wish to grow faster, maybe you need to squish your labor a little bit, right? And if that's true, well, I mean, I don't like it, but if that's actually how the world works, it's useful to know. What she says, what she notices, is that the original studies that supported this only studied a couple of countries. And they only studied countries that happened to have high levels of growth and high levels of repression. They didn't examine all the countries in the world to see if they have if there's generally a correlation between high levels of repression and high levels of economic growth. If that's true, then you would expect that then if there's low repression, then there's low economic growth, right? You can only answer that question. You can't answer that question by studying the single case more. You have to then look around the world and do a sort of quantitative comparison. So she shows us 3 different, like the paper just like progressively includes more cases to show how the findings change depending on what you study. So in the first one, you only study places that have high repression. In the second one, you look at all of Southeast Asia and East Asia, and you find that this correlation exists. And then, and this is her main point, she says, well, if you study anywhere other than Asia, you'll get a different relationship. So when it turns out that the relationship between repression and economic growth is only, you can only reach that conclusion if you're only studying East and Southeast Asia. The implication of this is that if you only study use qualitative methods, doesn't matter how correct you are about any case that you study qualitatively in Southeast Asia or East Asia. It matters for the general point. If your goal is to make the general argument for other countries, then you must do a quantitative analysis that compares across lots of them. And look, you don't have to do a fancy statistical analysis to reach these conclusions. All you need to do is calculate the scores on 2 different dimensions and see if they look like they line up or not. This isn't very fancy. But this is a good example of integrating, combining qualitative and quantitative analysis. Start qualitative, develop hypothesis, test hypothesis cross-nationally. So you start with the qualitative, and then you go quantitative. Now, another way you could do it is to go the other way around. And this is an important recent piece, not recent anymore, this was recent when I was in graduate school, now it's 20 years ago. This is an important article by Evan Lieberman, published in the American Political Science Review, called Nested Analysis as a Mixed Method Strategy for Comparative Research. And what he proposes is that what you want to do is start with a correlation. In his case, he was interested in correlations around the world, right? So every country in the world, establish a correlation and then go from there. But the point applies equally. If we were just to look at all the kabupaten kota in Indonesia, you start with the quantitative correlation and then you go qualitative from there. You start by establishing a correlation across a large number of units, and then you select particular units in there for intensive study. And the goal, so there's a lot of decision trees you can see up here. So one thing you might do is say, okay, if my finding in aggregate is that there's a correlation between X and Y. Let me select a case that is well predicted by that correlation and see when I study it qualitatively, do I get the same result? Okay? Does that make sense? So you just take a case that ought to be predicted well by your theory and see if the qualitative analysis of it supports the inference that you draw from the quantitative analysis. Seems very nice. And then the answer can either be yes or no. If the answer is yes, then you can stop. If the answer is no, well, then you've got to re-theorize a little bit and you reinterpret what your correlation means. But basically, you're starting with the quantitative analysis and then you do the qualitative test. The other thing you might do is say, so that's the left side, model testing small n analysis, MTSNA. On the right-hand side, you see model building small n analysis, MBSNA. Now what you're doing is you're saying, look, I've done a large quantitative analysis, and I want to see whether or not I believe that this correlation exists. Or like, maybe in this case, the correlation doesn't exist, and I thought that it would be there, so I want to know why it's not there. So now you're saying, I've started with a quantitative method, or quantitative analysis, that suggests that there should be a relationship. I don't find that relationship. I'm going to do a qualitative analysis to figure out like what went wrong. Okay? So now you're using the qualitative analysis not to test whether or not your argument is correct in specific cases, but to find out why your argument is wrong in specific cases. Either way, you start with the quantitative analysis and then you do the qualitative analysis. Make sense? So this is an approach that starts with the presumption, and then we'll come back to this in a little bit, that quantitative and qualitative analysis both serve one another, right? So going back here, the assumption is that you can learn more about cases by studying more of them because the qualitative and quantitative analysis ought to say the same thing. And here the same thing is true as well. The point of all of this is to say that under the assumption that, now I've put this in italics here, I want you to really remember this. Under the assumption that, if it is really true that qualitative and quantitative results ought to produce commensurate findings, right? Findings that make sense, that are comparable to one another, that are revealing the same underlying truth, that are part of the same general causal process. Then intensive research of particular cases complements extensive research of a collection of cross-case data. I'll say this again. Intensive research of cases complements extensive research of cross-case data. You can start quantitative and go qualitative, or you can start qualitative and go quantitative. Doesn't matter. Either way, you can think of a reason to do it. You can think of a logic of inference that follows from that. But the approach here for linking means combining is to say both of these things can complement one another, so I'm going to start with the one that well, it depends on your research question, but you start with one and then you do the other. So this is harder, right? Like, let's say, take an example. Let's say that I find that on average, there's a correlation between how democratic a country is, and look, this is a question that you will have encountered before. How democratic a country is and the percentage of the country's population that's Muslim. You can do that correlation. Okay? That's the cross-case quantitative association. That correlation exists. And then you come to Indonesia and you say, well, look, the world's largest Muslim country, perfectly democratic. What do we learn about the cross-case relationship from the Indonesian case? It's actually not clear. Is Indonesia an exception? Is the qualitative analysis incorrect about Indonesia? Is the quantitative analysis missing something? Like, the combination of qualitative and quantitative analysis does not really answer the question of how to put them together. You can put them together if you assume that one teaches you about the other. But that's not a finding. That's an assumption. That's what you start with. And if you think that's hard, now let's talk about linking means aligning. Now, this is the newest in the research that I'm interested in talking about today. It's the most provisional. And I actually feel a little bit uncomfortable even telling you about it because I really don't know what I think about it yet. Right? And I'm generally a curious person, and I think that we can learn more, and we ought to learn more. We ought to do more research and learn more things. Here's a case where I'm showing you things that are extremely new and they are not yet tested. I do not know what the sort of what social scientists think about what I'm about to tell you about. And so, you know, you can, if you're not sure what you think about it either, that's also okay. But I'm going to tell you about it, and then we'll talk about it. Linking means aligning. What does that mean? Okay. Instead of the assumption that I made before that qualitative and quantitative methodologies are commensurate, that was a relatively weaker assumption. Here's a stronger assumption. The logic of inference is the same for qualitative and quantitative methods. Under the assumption that the logic of inference for quantitative and qualitative methods is the same, then you can do research on small numbers of cases and still make causal inferences if you add qualitative information to the analysis. Okay? Now, I see some of you nodding. I don't even know what this means. Like, this is really tough. It's going to get tougher. The other way you might think about it, again, sublichnia, you can say, you can use qualitative inferential techniques, the methods of the quantitative inferential techniques, the methods of quantitative analysis to answer qualitative questions, qualitative causal queries. It's going to be interesting. Let me show you examples of this. I'm going to give you 3 examples. The first example comes from a piece published in the American Journal of Political Science by Adam Glynn and Naomi Giacchino in 2015, and it's called Using Qualitative Information to Improve Causal Inference. And what you're going to be seeing here, what you see up here, is a standard counterfactual logic of causal inference and use the potential outcomes framework. What does that mean? That means this is sometimes called the Neyman-Rubin causal model. This is a approach to causal analysis in the social and natural sciences, which comes from the philosophical tradition of counterfactual analysis, in which there are every unit can be either in the treatment group or a control group. You only observe one and not the other. But the difference between the treated group and the control group in any specific unit is the unit level of causal effect, and then you aggregate up to aggregate causal effects by studying a lot of them. And the idea here is that you can learn about causal effects by comparing groups that have received a treatment and groups that haven't received a treatment. But this only works in the standard analysis if you have a large N. Only if you have really large numbers of observations so that you can do statistical analyses that require the central limit theorem to apply. All right, that's very boring statistical analysis, but that's what they argue. That's what we're doing here. So Glynn and Giacchino develop an argument that sometimes if you don't have a large enough N for the central limit theorem to apply, or if you don't have perfect knowledge of the causal of the measures of the different observations that you want to study, what you can do, and I encourage you to read the essay if you want to know what this means, because I'm not even sure I understand what it means. What you can do is you can use other statistical techniques. Instead of looking at causal effects and measuring them in comparisons, what you can do is look at certain particular paired comparisons, and if you can rank which of the paired comparisons has the largest difference, and you can argue that the treatment assignment is as good as random, then you can use this small n information to do an inference that at least gives you the sign of the effect, whether or not the effect is positive or negative, even if you can't estimate the size of the effect. Now, this is aligning qualitative and quantitative methods in a very particular way. It's saying, let's use qualitative inferential techniques to measure variables, and then we're going to use quantitative inferential techniques to estimate the sign of a causal effect. If you do this, you're mostly doing mathematics. This is real Mein Anke situation here. You are going to be really focusing on measuring variables, which you're going to use, you're going to do this using qualitative information, but you are basically trying to make a quantitative argument using this qualitative information. So this aligns qualitative and quantitative information on the terms of the quantitative approach. Right? Quantitative approach is the one that you use. That's the sort of baseline framework we're using, but we're using qualitative methods to supplement and make causal inferences possible. Okay. Another version of this comes from two recent pieces. One is a piece by Tasha Fairfield and Andrew Chapman called Explicit Bayesian Analysis for Process Tracing, published in Political Analysis in 2017. And another is, and this is open source, actually. This book, Integrated Inferences, you can look this is all online. This whole book is online. You can look it up. Causal Models for Qualitative and Mixed Method Research by McCartan Humphreys and Alan Jacobs, published recently in 2023. If you Google this, it's online. Like the full text is online, open source. It's very good. And I'm not going to even walk you through this, but basically what these approaches do is they tell you ways to use Bayes' rule, which is like a formal logic of doing statistical and and causal inference using qualitative information, but a whole lot of math, to set up a causal question, to specify a causal model, to specify the logic of the data that you're going to be collecting, and to specify exactly what you can learn from that data given the hypotheses that you have. And then you update your prior beliefs to posterior beliefs based on the data that you've collected and what you've seen. The Fairfield and Chapman approach is doing the same thing as well. This is extremely technically demanding. It is extremely, from a qualitative scholar's perspective, it is very quantitative seeming. It's a lot of mathematics are involved. It's a lot of formal specifications of hypotheses, explicit assumptions, and explicit measurements of specific things. But if you do this, they argue that you can use qualitative information, once again, qualitative methodologies for measuring and counting things in order to make quantitative inferences in small n scenarios. Sounds nice, right? Well, that is a really nice thing if you believe the following things are true. Like, you have to believe that qualitative and quantitative methodologies have the same logic of inference. You have to start from the assumption that qualitative and quantitative methods can be linked. Not just linked in the sense that the results of one are informative about the results of the other, but that they're the same enterprise. And the thing which is kind of unattractive for many qualitative scholars about reading these things is it's basically saying, all you qualitative scholars have been doing it wrong all along. What you need is the quantitative template to discipline your qualitative analysis on terms that make sense to us. So if you agree, if you accept that assumption, if you concede that argument, well, you can do a lot of good stuff. Right? You can define a whole bunch of different causal queries, not just the boring ones, does X cause Y, but also you can ask, in the case of X1, or in the case of Y1, was X1 the cause of it? Right? You can do a lot more sophisticated, a lot more like sociologically meaningful questions this way. What percentage of the X's caused Y's, or what percentage of the Y's were caused by X's? Both ways you can do this. You also have a unified framework for treating different forms of evidence. As I've written up here, it tells you what data to collect. It specifically says don't just go out and read history. You need to collect specific facts to make specific arguments. And other facts are irrelevant. Like, you cannot learn from other things. And then sort of like, I think this is actually kind of interesting. I wish I believed these things, because if I did, then my life would be very organized and I could do a lot of good research. But it tells you everything that you could learn from the data that you could possibly collect. It tells you what is possible to learn given your assumptions and what's impossible to learn given your assumptions. If this is intriguing to you, I do really encourage you to read the Integrated Inferences book. Do you know what it means to hate read something? I like to sometimes hate read books, like read it as an enemy, like bound not to be convinced by it. If you don't like this research, I would still suggest that you hate read it so that you can understand what's going on. But this is an approach that says that it's possible to have a single logic of inference, and qualitative information and qualitative evidence can be used to do research in a template that quantitative scholars understand, because it is their template. Right? Okay. So I'm almost done. First, a slide on critical reflections, and then a slide on conclusions. So let's just stop and think about what I said previously. When I started, I said, linking can mean three different things, right? Linking might mean, just using, or it could mean combining, or it can mean aligning. The world that we live in, the world that I've lived in, I think that most of us live in, is not disturbed too much by saying that linking means using. That to do an experiment and interpret the results, you have to have qualitative information. Or to learn about history, you will probably need to understand some numbers. This is a low bar. It's pretty easy. Most of you do this already anyway. So there's nothing really complex or foreboding about imagining research along this template. But as we go towards combining, and even more so if we go towards aligning, it gets a lot harder to imagine how this research is feasible without a whole bunch of assumptions, right? The scope for making progress on an actual research question, it gets a lot harder. It's not very hard to do linking equals using. It is extremely hard and requires a lot of work to do linking means aligning. It's just worth just saying that. It's important. Second one, and now, so I said before that this was all going to be sort of this is on the terms of the quantitative scholars, right? They're the ones who are dictating the terms here. Let's say you're a qualitative scholar and you really believe, or you do qualitative research, you use qualitative methodologies, right? If you really believe in this stuff, you probably look at the aligning, or even you're looking at the combining approach. You look at this research and you say, is this even qualitative analysis anymore? Or am I just mining history for yes/no questions? Did this cause this or that? Is that even interesting? Is that what qualitative scholarship really is about? It's almost like we're not really doing qualitative research anymore. We're not treating qualitative research the way that qualitative scholars teach it, and the way that qualitative scholars understand it. I don't read history to know one fact about a country at a time, right? I don't think that the world is looks like an Excel spreadsheet. It's not just a rectangular data set with variables and observations. I think that the world is messy, and I read history because I'm interested in all the things that cannot be represented in a rectangular data set. Now, everything that I said here, I told you was a way to align qualitative methods with quantitative methods or something of that form. I didn't really tell you too many details because this is not a class on technique. This is a class on methods, right? This isn't a class or a lecture for me to really show you what to do. We're not getting out R, right? We're not going to go to an archive, right? I'm telling you about the approach. I'm telling you about the framework. What I didn't mention is that all of the things, even in the most sophisticated version of the analysis that I've been talking about here, all of these things are greatly simplifying history in order to study it. Right? They are imagining that the world is actually not complex, that most variables are 1, 0, yes, no, true, false, present, absent, black, white. There's the things that these models, even the ones that are the most technically sophisticated, they all start with amazingly simplistic assumptions about how the world works in order to allow to do the sort of linking of qualitative and quantitative methodologies requires not just an assumption that you can do it. It also requires an assumption about the world. The world has to look a certain way for these analytical techniques to work. And if the people who were really developing these analyses were in this room, they would say, no, you can do these analyses using a world which is much more complicated and allowing for gradations and allowing for nonlinearities and interference and all the things that makes the social world interesting. But they couldn't actually do it because the mathematics required to even represent the questions that they're doing is extremely complicated, right? And so if the methodologist cannot even specify what they're doing, how can a user do it, right? I don't think that's possible. And then finally, I mean, this is not finally, I'll have a number 5, but number 4. Where are the non-positivist approaches here? Right? You know, Shafi was talking about like non-Western positivist approaches to doing social science research and social science research methods. None of that is represented here. It's basically saying the world is positivist. We will study the world as if there are facts and that we're out there and we're just going to collect them and then we're going to use mathematical logic to reason about them. A lot of people are interested in qualitative methodologies and use qualitative methodologies specifically because they reject that assumption, because that's not what they want to do. So all of this linking of qualitative and quantitative methods that I've done has just basically ignored the reason that qualitative methodologies exist. Oh, that was the last one. Yeah. So like all the things that we were talking about here are basically just like a very small subset of what qualitative analysis actually is. Very small subset of what qualitative methodologies are. The difference that I think is more important than linking when I say linking qualitative and quantitative methods, I think that gap is a lot less substantial than the gap between positivism and non-positivism. Like that's the big thing. And I think I have no answer to this question, so do not ask me to say it to you. But a much more tricky and weighty question is linking interpretivist and positivist methodologies. Like that's really like provocatively difficult. I would be happy to come back here for the 4th summer method school and try to answer that question for you. But suffice it to say, these are bigger questions than we have here. So conclusions and takeaways. Integrating qualitative and quantitative methodologies sounds good, right? Doesn't it sound good? Doesn't that sound like, wouldn't it be great if we could link them? Wouldn't that be fantastic? But it actually is hard, and like the more deeply you want to link them, the harder it is. It relies on a lot of assumptions. The assumptions, I don't think assumptions are a bad thing. I think assumptions are actually extremely useful. And I love a good assumption, because now I know what makes my argument work. If people say that I don't make assumptions, don't believe them. They just don't know what their assumptions are. Everybody makes assumptions. Have to make assumptions to do research. But it does rely on assumptions, and the assumptions that we have to make in order to do this task of linking qualitative and quantitative analysis, these assumptions are significant. They are not small. It really matters. Number 4, it's unlikely to transform social science. What I said before was that I was like wary of sharing with you this, like the last of the 3 perspectives, because I don't even know if this is going to survive. You know, there's a lot of new methods that are proposed and then forgotten because they're not useful and they don't tell us anything about the world that we want to know. And so I'm just skeptical that we are going to solve the problem of linking qualitative and quantitative methodologies in our lifetimes. It's unlikely that you happen to be students at the time when we figured out how to do social sciences once and for all. Almost certainly in 20 years, there'll be different answers to these questions. And this is the most important thing for you to take away. Like, I really think that it's good to link qualitative and quantitative methods. I had a lot of fun intellectually thinking about this presentation and thinking about what I wanted to share with you today. And I think I'm smarter for having done it. I think that you are probably smarter for having thought about it with me here. And I think that if you do more thinking along this way, you will understand a lot more things. But I don't think that everybody has to do everything. I am not good at everything. You are not good at everything. If you are a really good qualitative scholar, I encourage you to be a really good qualitative scholar without thinking that you are an incomplete scholar because you're not also a quantitative scholar. I also think if you are a good quantitative scholar, you should be the best quantitative scholar that you can be. The most careful, the most sensitive, the most sensible. That you do not also have to become a qualitative scholar. I'm a professor. I am a terrible administrator. That's fine. Some people are better at being administrators. Other people are better at being professors. It's good to have a division of labor. And with that, I'm going to stop and say terima kasih.
Check. Thank you so much, Pak Tom. I'm very happy actually to see a post-KKV sensibility in your lecture. Yeah, you respect both tradition, qualitative and quantitative, and you don't champion quantitative the way KKV does and train us back in the States. And I'm happy also to report that we teach GEDIs, don't select on the dependent variable. We also teach Lieberman. Regression first and see where's the outlier and find out why this is not taking place. Thanks to our methodologists, Mas Jai and Mas Hiro back there, yeah. And to our students, you should take notes. If Pak Tom teaches the same thing, your lecturer given you the best materials, yeah. But we haven't taught them the Bayesian rule. We haven't taught them how to update their priors, but probably this is what the summer method is useful for. So we're open for Q&A sessions. I'm taking questions from the floor. We will take first 3 questions. Anyone? Yes, the lady there, and then
Thank you very much. Those are very good questions, and I'll do the first one first and the second one second. The question was, so everybody here, here's what it is. For qualitative scholars who are doing poster presentations, right? How do you make them interesting for an audience that is going to see a poster session? And if you've never done a poster session before or presented a research output on a poster, let me tell you, it's really an artificial environment. It's a very hard way to share research. I also think that, if I may, the technology of the poster as a way to share research is a very quantitative thing to do. Because the poster is, it's like research question, hypothesis, theoretical model, hypotheses, data, conclusion, or results, conclusion. It's very easy to put all those things on a poster. It's very hard to put a qualitative on a poster. Now, I think the problem is that these are more appropriate for quantitative research. And so I always feel bad for qualitative scholars who have to put their research on a poster because it's not easy. My suggestion is to, this is not a great answer, but it's the best answer that I have, is to recognize that the purpose of the poster is to communicate primarily to quantitatively oriented scholars in a way that they understand, right? In a format that makes sense to them. So if you're a qualitative scholar, what do? I would probably start by trying to abstract from the narrative, to focus on what is the one conclusion that I want the reader to, or the viewer to learn. And I would start by saying my research question is about answering this question. So you have to kind of transform your research from a rich narrative, textually based format, which like really makes sense as an article, right, written down, or as a book, like lots of text that you can read. And you have to basically learn how to represent it as a small number of discrete bits of information that you can put on a poster. It's basically, I would write an outline and put the outline on the poster. It's not very satisfying, though. The other thing that I would do is I would put pictures on there so people have something to look at. Because people want to look at, like, you don't want to read a poster. You want to sort of step back and view the poster. But I think that's not a very good answer to your question, but I think it's an honest answer to the question. The poster is not good for qualitative research. It's good for quantitative research. And so the most you can do is make it very simple, make it very like schematic, like an outline, and then put pictures on it so people have something to look at. But it's really unfair. It's not an equal thing. Your second question was about qualitative analysis in the era of COVID, right? Okay. Online interviews, I think, are extremely valuable, but they are valuable in one dimension only. No, they're particularly valuable in one dimension and less valuable in others. The really nice thing about online interviews is that you can reach more people quickly and cheaply, and that's a real benefit. I'm reluctant to use online interviews unless my goal is just to maximize coverage, extensive coverage, while minimizing costs. For intensive analysis, for really understanding, for the things that I think an interview really does, I think online interviews are very hard. And I'm very skeptical about AI in general. Since we're recording, I won't tell you my honest thoughts about AI. But suffice to say, they are very negative, and I'm looking at the camera. If AI is listening, purple uniforms make elephants.
Thank you, Pak Tom. We're taking more questions from the floor. Please, Mbak Siska, yes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Siska from Paramadi Negeri School of Diplomacy. Just connecting to the EI things, something that I miss, thank you for your highlight of the assumptions on the complexity of the words, but something I miss from your presentation is the word today with big data. All those visual things that is sometimes or more likely more hard to manage if we come to data. And there is some new approaches in the line of mixed method. So I think it's a very humble start when you say that answering the questions of linking, you not start with the claim of the mixed methods. So how do you think about the mixed method? Is in between those categories that you already put forward? Thank you.
I think that mixed methods is like a synonym of multi-method, right? Like mixed methods really, to me, is a description of like how we can combine different logics of inference and different sources of data and methodological approaches to the same analytical question in order to answer the same sorts of questions. Big data is very interesting. I'm going to tell you a story really quickly of a big data project that I'm part of that I cannot figure out what to do with. So I have a colleague who is really interested in popular music. And so what she and I have done is we have written a Python script to scrape the lyrics of every Billboard Top 100 song in the United States since 1958. So 28,000 songs, all the lyrics. It's really cool, right? We have the lyrics for all the songs that were popular. And our question is whether or not music has become less political over time. Now, this is English language music we're focusing on here. So we do this very sophisticated quantitative data scraping technique to collect all the textual data. We put it in an analyzable format. And then we have to say, so we've got all the data. The data is big. It's huge, right? The data is big. It's very complicated. And then we have to answer the actual question that we have, which is music less political over time? And all the data in the world can't tell me how to answer that question. So we've used various different approaches. You search for words like war. You search for words like politics. You search for words like elections. In the United States, a very important word for representing politics is from the 1960s and 1970s was Vietnam. Search for the word Vietnam, Iraq, Korea, Afghanistan, right? Look for different political things. But you want to know what? Nobody believes our results because they don't believe that you can represent political content in words, right? Like you cannot just pick out the political meaning of the words by dumping it into a computer and seeing if certain patterns of words are there. The best example of this is the Marvin Gaye song, What's Going On? What's Going On has no obvious political meaning, but if you listen to it and you know what it's about, you know that this is very political, right? So I guess my response to you is the big data is like a great way of getting things to analyze it, but it does not ever tell you how to analyze it. Like the presence of the data is only a resource that you can use to, do correlations perhaps, but if you're searching from something from the data beyond the fact that there's a lot of it, like a lot of people are excited to learn we have 28,000 songs, but 28,000 songs and no ability to understand them makes zero contribution. So the point is we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to proceed, but we need to remember that, if we're going to do multi-method or mixed method analyses, we're going to have to make sure that we actually do qualitative analysis, right? The computer cannot do it for you. We have to remember, and what we're actually doing is we're randomly selecting songs from our big database, and we're having actual people read the lyrics and tell us what they think. So you cannot remove the qualitative approach from the analysis, even though a company will sell you an algorithm that says that it can do it. The algorithms don't work.
Just jump on that, if I may, Pak Tom. Are you saying that the algorithm cannot penetrate at the semantic level? Or was it because the sophistication of the statistical analysis was not there? For example, you've used the structural topic modeling, but doesn't tell you anything? Or what was it?
Yeah, we literally used structural topic modeling, and it didn't tell us anything. Like that is actually
like the tools is not working.
Yeah, the tools are not suited for the task, right? They're unable to do. It's actually extremely easy to just dump all that data into a structural topic model, press go, and it'll produce findings, but it doesn't mean we don't know what they mean, right? Now you asked a harder question of whether or not the statistical tools can penetrate the semantic content. I am not sure that the answer is no. I'm not sure, but I think it's no.
You are an optimistic.
Yeah, I'm pessimistic. Like I am optimistic that we will not replace humans.
Okay, thank you so much, Tom. More questions from the floor. Oh, we have plenty now. Okay, Torres, and then the lady and the gentleman back there. Sarul, would you be? And then Mas Mirza. Okay. We have, these are our students, but.
Thank you, Mr. Pepinsky, Pak Gede, for the opportunity to explain us more about the methodological things. Even it sounds easy, but it's very hard, I know that, to understand the meaning of linking qualitative and the quantitative. The question is that correct me if my logic is wrong regarding these methodological things. I knew that to find puzzles in the research, many people say that we should do the regression first, like we see the regularities and which one the case that become deviant or the outlier. This is deserve to be investigated more. But when we find these outlier cases, when we want to have a very comprehensive explanation, we want to make a very valid causal inferences, many students maybe want to find more findings using the mixed method, or how do we position ourselves to link between the qualitative and also the quantitative method. So the question is, when we want to make a very valid causal inferences, where should we position ourselves? Where should we situate ourselves? Is it regarding to the topic, is it we should linking qualitative and quantitative as a use, or we should align or combining when we want to investigate this outlier with more nuanced understanding? Because I read some articles from you for what the title to one single country, the return of one single country. It's very enlightening, and we see that this single country studies has a very strong internal validity, but it lacks of the external validity. But as a student, do you have a suggestion? Where should we situate ourselves?
Thank you, Taris.
Thank you.
Yes, that's a great question. And the answer, I can't give you, the answer is going to be different for everybody here. So like, the answer for you may be different than the answer for you. So I don't want to presume that there's a simple, uniform blanket answer. But to the extent that there is, I think that that you want to do two things at the same time. If your objective is to make valid causal inferences about the social world, I want you to understand at the first, one is a philosophical question. When you say cause, what do you mean? And there are many different answers to that question. And I can't tell you which is the correct answer or which is the incorrect answer. But if you're not aware of what the assumptions you're making are, then you will never be able to make causal inferences on the standard that you're adopting, right? So if you believe in a sort of regularity theory of causality, well then you better do research as if that's true. Then experiments aren't that useful. On the other hand, if you have a counterfactual manipulationist theory of causality, you need to be thinking about the treatment assignment process and things like this. So the first answer is take the philosophy of science very seriously. Understand what is the approach that you are making that is what are the assumptions about what causation is that justify your analysis. That's the first one. Second one is you have to know a lot of history and a lot of qualitative information, right? I think I don't know of any discipline, no science, no hard science, no engineering, no nothing, that doesn't require actually knowing things, right? You cannot learn about anything. No discipline that I know of teaches you that all you need to do is experiments, or it teaches you that all you need to know is correlations, that it's just about the numbers. Every discipline tells you you need to understand the theory of how things work in order to understand that it works. And to understand the theory of how things work, you need to know facts about the thing, right? So it comes down to knowing history. You know, if you're interested in stuff in the past, you need to understand history. If you understand the present, you need to be sort of qualitatively aware of the world around you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Tom. And then the lady back there, Sarul, would you be so kind?
Okay, thank you very much for the great presentation, Professor Pepinsky. And
would you be so kind to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah.
Thank you.
After this, my name is Diah Ayu Chandraningrum. You can call me Sandra. I'm a doctoral student in communication science in Universitas Indonesia. I just want to ask you about two questions. The first question is, in my research, I usually use the digital data, digital media, Instagram, TikTok, etc. So sometimes I have difficulties in use it in mixed method, that we have some different measures in social media, like likes, engagement, enrichment, etc. So do you have any example, or do you have any evaluation, or suggestion how to do the mixed method by using the digital data? And the second question is, I also sometimes use the big data by data scraping and also analysis with computer tools. And some scholars categorize it as the quantitative methods by using the numerical and computer tools, but some others categorize it as a qualitative analysis. So my question is, what is the main difference between the mixed method and qualitative method that emphasize in digital data, in quantitative data, and interview like qualitative data? I hope that question is, you get my point in my question. Okay, thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Mbak.
Of course. Thank you very much. So I'm not a communication scholar or media scholar, so I'm going to just give you the answer that I would give a political science audience, and it may be relevant, and it may be not. But we can talk more later if you like. So for me, the main thing that I would say for using mixed method or multi-method analysis for communications research in social media or digital media is, I think the easiest part of studying digital media is the quantitative part, right? If you can get the data, then there's a lot of it, right? If you can get access to the API that extracts the information of likes, or that allows you to represent the structure of the network, that's the easy part. It's hard, but it's easier to understand that stuff because there's always going to be a lot of data. There's just an enormous amount of data involved in these things, as you know, and so that's easy. The hard part is the qualitative side, like what makes it qualitative. And I think that a really important thing to think about is, what do people think they're doing on social media? What do they think? What does a like mean? Like, do you ever stop to think about that? Obviously you think about this because you're a communications scholar, but political scientists or people who don't really study communications and social media, we don't really stop to think about what does it mean to show a picture of yourself online, right? My son is on Snapchat, and they send pictures of each other to each other, like their faces, and I find that to be extremely intimate. I would never do that, but they do this all the time. So I don't understand what they're doing, and understanding what people think, literally what they think they're doing. What is the meaning that they impute to showing a picture of their head to each other, I think is really, it's not an insubstantial question. I think that there's a lot of qualitative information. So you have to understand qualitatively, what is the semantic content behind the statement? What is the intersubjective understanding of what the communication act is supposed to be about? I think there's rich room for qualitative analysis there. And I'm convinced that my children and I are doing something very different on social media. That they are doing, they think about it entirely differently. And if I try to think about it if I try to police them the way that I assume it, it'll be really silly. So that's the answer to the first question. Now, the answer to the question of what's the difference between qualitative and quantitative, here's the answer that I give. If there is a statistic which is calculated from the data that relates two variables to one another, it's quantitative. That's what makes it quantitative for me. That's what I say to my students about how do you know that you're doing qualitative or quantitative analysis or quantitative methods. If you calculate a correlation coefficient or anything like it, or a measure of association, then it's quantitative. If you're just doing a summary, unidimensional summary, like the average number of likes on this post is 10 or whatever, unidimensional, I think that is qualitative. And so, I mean, I don't think that's a very good answer, but that is an answer. So if you want to defend why your research is quantitative, then just check to see if you're using any measure of association between any two variables. And then I think that's the answer to the question.
Thank you, Pak Tom. I think we have a gentleman back there. Sarul, would you be so kind? After that, Mas Mirza, but there is a gentleman back there raising his hand first, yes. Would you be so kind to introduce yourself, Mas?
Cek. Assalamualaikum Bapak Pepinsky.
Oh, that's one of our students.
I am Gulam Ruhma Al-Ghifari. My grandmother called me Algi. And I have a question about, the question is, when we do mixed method and in the quantitative section, we do cross country and time series. So when we try to do classic assumption test, and the result is let's say the normality test. So the result is the data not distributed normal. And my question is, because I think this is debatable when I looking for the answer. So my question is it okay when our data, let's say for instance we have 40 or 50 countries with the 20 years and the overall observation is around 800 and 900 observation. So my question is it okay when our data, the result is not distributed normal and we support with the argument from the other researchers, from the previous research? Because as far as I know, some researchers say, is it okay, and another is vice versa. So the second question is about the assumption that you conveyed to us before. Is it how to make the theoretical framework in the mixed method? Because, for instance, we use the political risk in the theory in our overall research. So in the quantitative part, we have some variables. And let's say in our independent is political variable, in our control or determinant is economic variable. So my question is it okay, our main theory is a political risk, but in the how to explain the variable, how to explain our hypothesis, our assumption, we use different theory. Let's say the main theory is political risk, and to explain the variable we use new threat theory, we use dependency theory. Is it okay, or we must use one framework from theory?
Okay,
that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. These are very precise questions. I feel like you're asking about a specific research output, perhaps.
It's outsourcing.
The answer to your first question of what do you do if you have actual data never cooperate with the assumptions ever. What do you do with actual data and people observe that one feature of your data is inconsistent with the assumptions that are made? What are you supposed to do about it? Especially when you know that there are different answers to the question, right? I love the normality question. That's a wonderful example of, for some questions that matters tremendously, and for other questions it doesn't matter at all. So my solution to that specific question is to be very clear. This is a theme that you're hearing from me, is to be very clear as what purpose are you using that data for? Does the purpose require normality? is this a complete model of the process, or is this the estimate of an effect of one of the variables? Because if it's a complete model of the process, then you need assumptions about the distribution of the errors. If you're estimating the effect of a causal variable, you do not need assumptions about the distributions of the errors. And so that's the sort of thing that only your theory and your question can help you answer. Unfortunately, when it comes to statistics, if you spend enough time Googling, you can find anybody who tells you that anything is okay. So I would, what the more important thing for me is to say, be very precise about the framework in which you're working, and then follow that guideline. And almost certainly, if what I understand about what you're telling us is correct, you don't care about the normality of the errors in that specific application. You're estimating the effect of one variable on the other one. The second one is, it's actually a very interesting question about what sorts of theories go with what sorts of variables, and do they have to be aligned? And I'm very concerned that I'm going to tell you an answer which is different than what your professor has told you. So if your professor is in the room, listen to your professor, not me. But in my hunch, not my hunch, my approach is to be very flexible on what goes with what. This is a university with real strengths in social sciences, right? This is what you're really good at. And you're really good, and you're building research on political economy, right? And I do political economy. And one of my favorite things to do is to explain that neoclassical political economy as practiced in Rochester, New York, like very, very, very neoliberal political economy, is actually substantively making the same arguments as the Murdoch School of Political Economy in Australia. That these are very different theoretical frameworks, but they make the same argument a lot. They just have different frameworks for it. So I don't care if you reach the conclusion from the Murdoch School perception of political economy, or if you reach the conclusion from the Rochester School of Political Economy. It doesn't matter. For me, what matters is there an alignment between what you are measuring and what your theory says that it measures? If you're using political risk variables and dependency theory hasn't ever used political risk theory variables before, that's okay. Just make sure that on the terms of dependency theory, political risk variables mean what you think that they do. That's the answer. And again, if your professor thinks otherwise, then just forget what I just said.
Thank you, Pak Tom. And then finally, we have Mas Mirza.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas Pepinsky. Introduce myself. My name is Mirza, PhD in political science. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm interested about the nested analysis you introduced in your presentation by Liebersman. He said about when you start with a large n, we can find the outlier and come into the small n to use qualitative analysis, and then the causal inference is find it. But when we start with the small n's, for instance, in my research, religious populism in policy making in Indonesia, I took the sample in the various regions with the various religion majority in the province, like Aceh in Islam, Bali is Hindu, and Papua is Christian, and entity is Catholics. That is small n. And the problem is, in the small n, in the qualitative analysis is, according to your paper, the single country analysis is the external validity and generalization. You suggest us about to expand the beyond single country maybe within national or cross-national case. The other scholar, Mahoney, said that you can use the control factual to generalization. My question is, how can we deal with mixed method to generalization? We can start from small n to large n, or what kind I use to mix methods.
Thank you, Mas Mirza.
Thank you.
Sure. That's a great question, and that's a question that is very hard for anybody to answer. Like, I first want to just acknowledge that you are at a very important stage in your research in which you're asking a fundamental question that nobody can answer, right? There's no correct answer is what I mean. Like, you can, it depends on what your tastes are. If you go in one direction, your research will be one way. If you go in your other direction, research will be another way. And I can't tell you which is the correct way. And anybody who tells you that they know the correct answer is also wrong. Again, if your advisor is in the room. But here's what I would do if I were you. That's how I'd answer the question. If I were in your shoes, you're answering a very interesting question. You're posing a very interesting question about religious populism in Indonesia. And an important observation about Indonesia is that it's a plural country in terms of religion, and religion is unevenly distributed by geography. So there are parts of Indonesia that have majorities that are not Muslim, and there are parts of Indonesia that have majorities that are Muslim, and there are several different types of religions, and of course there are many people in Jakarta who, like, there's variation everywhere, right? But there's a majority in some places, which is one thing, and there's a majority in other places that are the other. That is a qualitative fact about Indonesia, which is important. Not every country is like this. And so if you are interested in finding and generalizing about what it's like to have different, like, geographically concentrated religious majorities in a country, then what I would start by doing is enumerating countries that have that feature also. The number one, like, I'm just sitting here, India, right? That immediately comes to mind. I wouldn't say it's a counterfactual. It's just like another case, right? That's a place that if your arguments are meant to be about the rest of the world at all, then it probably ought to be a place that you would look. A second place that I would look is the Netherlands. Kind of surprising, right? But northern, Germany also. Northern is more Protestant, southern is more Catholic. Another place you might look is Nigeria. Northern is Muslim, southern is Christian. So I would just work like that. Not because those are counterfactuals, not because they're the same, but those are the scope of countries that would be like that. On the other hand, if what you want to do is answer a slightly different question, which is the presence of a religious majority, of like different geographically concentrated religious majorities responsible for a specific character of Indonesia at the aggregate level, I would look for a large, diverse country that does not have geographically concentrated religious majorities in the same way. So I would choose a different country, United States maybe, France, right? Other countries that they lack the variable that you're interested of. So that's the second option. It depends on what you want to do. And then the third option is, I don't think there's anything, I hope you don't conclude from that paper on single country studies that you shouldn't do single country studies. Because I think you should do single country studies are good, and Indonesia is a good country to study. That's totally fine. You might also just say that I am not interested in generalizing to the entire world, or my generalizations to the rest of the world are conditional, or they are provisional, they are speculative, that's future research. For the purposes of my dissertation, what matters to me is I want to explain these 4 regions really well. That's fine too. You learn a different thing from that exercise. It's valuable as well, but that's not wrong or right. It's just a different choice. So I guess the advice for you is, and again, this theme, I keep saying this, like you as the researcher, right, cannot think of yourself as implementing the rules, right? You, as the researcher, should think of yourself as choosing the path that meets the objectives that you have. And then once you've done that, the rules will be easy to implement because they're not sophisticated and they're intuitively sensible.
Thank you, Pak Tom. Now I'd like to exercise my right to be selfish as a moderator and reserve the last question to Pak Tom. The answer to this question would be beneficial to my students as well. So I really like when you encourage our students to be an expert in what they really like and be comfortable with. For example, if they're good at the qualitative method, be a good qualitative method researchers, and vice versa, quantitative, good at quantitative. But I usually also add, it doesn't hurt for you to learn a bit of the quantitative side of things. Learn a little bit of math. I usually said, there is an old German saying, don't hate what you don't understand. Please understand it first. You don't have to be an expert, but at least you're going to be able to read papers from your colleagues in economics or from the same department, but just more quantitative bent. And this is useful because it prevents what would Dick Robinson say, debates in parallel universes. Because you read Pak Tom, heavy quant, but also you read Pak Syafiq, both studying Islam in Indonesia and voting behaviors, so you can enrich yourself. What would you say? Did I give wrong guides to my students?
No. That's exactly the right way to do it. I think, and I'm not just saying this because I'm thankful that you gave me a softball.
By the way, I have to add, my colleagues were here, Jos and Abel were here. I was bad at math. I was struggling, they didn't know it, but I have to do that. So just to share my experience, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. So we were talking before about different sorts of research strategies here. Before, when we were just saying hello, we were talking about interviews with elites. I find them unpleasant, and I'm not very good at them. That's fine, right? I think it's important to know, though, why these are sources of information and giving other people the authority to learn that way and the respect and understanding of what they're doing. I think that's very important. So I agree entirely with the way that Gede thinks about it, because that's the way I think about it. You know, you don't have to like regressions, but it would be very silly to hate them without knowing what they are. Or like you want to be a friendly critic, or if you want to be a hostile critic, you better really know that the criticism is a valid one. There's nothing worse than an unfounded criticism that's not based on like a serious understanding of the problem. Which is why I think, you know, this exercise of talking about linking qualitative and quantitative methods, the most important thing that I want you to take away from this is that you don't have to, right? And it should be hard, right? They're not the same, right? That's not, if it were very easy and if it were the same, I wouldn't have to tell you about it and you wouldn't have to teach about it. But you can only know that if you have a healthy appreciation of it. I think that for my dissertation research, which happened in Indonesia and also in Malaysia, it was almost entirely qualitative. Almost entirely qualitative. And I learned so much about how Indonesia is and how Malaysia is. And I learned also, I'll speak personally, I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about what I'm good at and what I like, and now Mas Burhan and I, we do surveys together. Like I choose something else, right? That's another way of doing research which is more suitable to my tastes. But I think that if I dismissed qualitative research because I didn't understand it, it would be very silly. And now I feel like I have a healthy appreciation for why it's valuable. And if nobody did it, we would be in real trouble.
Thank you so much, Pak Tom. And I think with that, we end our public lecture. Please join me to applause Pak Tom Pepinsky. Thank you so much for coming. We will continue our conversation with Pak Tom. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much to Professor Thomas and Dr. Gede for the fruitful discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, finally we have reached the end of our agenda. We hope that this event gives you valuable insights and will broaden your knowledge. But before we close our agenda today, let's have a quick photo session to capture the memory. Last but not least, thank you very much and we look forward to having you again on another occasion. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.